In the frozen void of the Arctic Eastern Front, where entire units vanished without a trace and the wind screamed like metal tearing apart, soldiers began whispering about a sniper no one ever saw, only felt. They called him the Ghost, not because he was silent, but because the men he killed were found with eyes frozen wide in terror, their rifles still aimed at nothing. One night, under a moon drowned in stormlight, a patrol reported snow rising straight upward as if gravity reversed. Another claimed they heard footsteps circling them, though the frost showed no prints. But the final message received before Outpost Chronicles went dark was the most chilling. A single trembling voice whispering, "He's behind the storm. It's not human." Hours later, the blizzard swallowed the outpost whole, and the sky split open. The Arctic sector of the Eastern Front was never meant for war, yet war arrived there like an uninvited plague. It was a place where compasses spun wildly, where sound carried in impossible directions, and where the frozen horizon seemed to shift when no one was looking. Temperatures plunged low enough to kill exposed men in minutes. Rifles jammed even under blankets of grease. Boots fused to the ice if a soldier stood still too long. And yet, commanders insisted on holding the line. The strategic objective was simple on paper: secure the northern corridor so convoys could slip through the polar routes undetected. But the land itself seemed hostile, as if resisting every footfall of foreign armies. Patrols sent to scout ahead often returned with reports that made little sense. Strange noises under the snow, sudden pockets of warm air and -40 cold, shadows moving uphill against the wind. At first, these claims were dismissed as hallucinations caused by frostbite or exhaustion, until the disappearances. Eastern Front records from Winter 43 mention an unidentified sniper responsible for over a dozen confirmed kills, yet no one had ever seen the shooter. No muzzle flash, no footprints, no casing. Just a single, perfect bullet found embedded in frostbitten helmets or lodged inside the ice behind fallen men. The kills were too precise, too clean, too distant to be human. And the strangest part, the bodies were always found with frost that didn't match the ambient temperature. Colder, almost unnaturally so, as if whatever pulled the trigger drained heat from the world itself. Command labeled it Soviet counter-sniper operations. Soldiers whispered another name, the Ghost. Officially, the Ghost was dismissed as superstition, a coping mechanism born from isolation and endless night. But off the record, officers exchanged stories behind closed tent flaps of seeing a human silhouette standing in the blizzard, unmoving, untouched by wind, vanishing whenever they blinked. A black shape against white nothingness. Some said he was a deserter who froze to death and kept fighting. Others believed he was the last survivor of a destroyed battalion driven mad by cold. A few claimed he wasn't a man at all. Not anymore. By late December, the Arctic Front entered its longest stretch of polar night. For nearly 30 days, the sun never rose, darkness stretched unbroken across the sky, and something changed on the battlefield. Snow began to fall upward in thin spirals, like inverted smoke columns drifting into the heavens. Strange pressure waves rolled across the tundra, bending ice like soft clay. Compass needles pointed straight into the sky. Outpost Chronicles recorded sudden heat spikes, brief pockets of warmth surrounded by lethal cold, as if something alive was moving through the landscape. Around this time, the unit we now follow arrived. Captain Markov, Sergeant Bran, Corporal Lutz, Private Urich, and Signalman Oren. They were a hardened reconnaissance team, accustomed to long-range patrols and brutal conditions, but even they felt an unease creeping under their collars the moment they crossed into the northern corridor. The silence was wrong, too complete. Even the wind seemed to avoid them. When they camped, the ground beneath their tents vibrated faintly, like distant footsteps moving beneath the ice. During their first night, Urich awoke screaming, claiming a shadow stood inches from his face inside the tent. But the frost on the canvas never melted, suggesting no body heat had been present. 2 days later, they discovered the remains of a Soviet platoon half buried in a shallow depression. Not scattered, not torn apart, but perfectly arranged, kneeling, facing the same direction, rifles frozen upright as if someone had positioned them after death. There were no signs of struggle, no tracks leading in or out. The frost on their uniforms was pure white, too clean, like newly fallen snow. Oren took a photograph, but when he developed it, the shadows in the background formed a faint outline of a humanoid shape, blurred, tall, and leaning forward as if watching them. The next morning, Captain Markov received an urgent transmission. Chronicles is gone. Investigate immediately. Do not engage unless fired upon. The message ended with a single faint whisper that analysts later claimed was just radio interference, though every man who heard it felt their blood run cold. The whisper simply said, "Behind you." Yet when they turned, nothing stood there but a wall of black Arctic night. The march toward Cray 7 marked the beginning of the nightmare. The snow grew heavier, the wind quieter, and the boundary between reality and something older, colder, and hungrier began to dissolve. Whatever haunted this land was waiting for them, and it knew they were coming. The deeper the squad pushed into the Arctic corridor, the more fractured their perspectives became. Each man interpreted the strange phenomena differently, and these differences slowly carved fault lines between them. Captain Markov, hardened by years of frontline command, clung to logic like a lifeline. Anything he couldn't explain, he blamed on atmospheric anomalies or Soviet psychological tactics. Even when the compass needles spun into the sky and frost formed on the inside of his coat, he insisted there had to be a rational cause. To him, fear was the enemy, not the phantom silhouette rumored to haunt the blizzard. Markov believed staying grounded in discipline was the only way to keep the squad alive. Sergeant Brain, however, had survived enough battlefields to recognize when a threat went beyond enemy strategy. He was the first to admit he couldn't explain what was happening, but he also didn't dismiss it. During their march, he kept glancing over his shoulder, feeling watched. He told no one, but wrote in his pocket journal that the darkness had weight, like something breathing against the back of my neck. To Bran, the ghost sniper wasn't a hallucination. It was a hunter. He didn't know its nature, but he believed completely that it was stalking them. Corporal Lutz tried to rationalize the fear through science. Before the war, he had studied glacial structures, and he knew certain kinds of ice cavities could produce infrasound, low frequencies that caused anxiety, paranoia, and hallucinations. At first, he blamed everything on that: the whispers, the phantom footsteps, the flicker of movement in the snowfields. But when the squad discovered Soviet helmets with clean bullet holes and no surrounding footprints, his theories began to crumble. Lutz remained silent for the rest of the march, lost in calculations that no longer made sense. Private Urich, the youngest, broke fastest. He had never known cold like this, never heard a silence so deep it felt alive. Urich began seeing shapes in the darkness. Not human shapes, but elongated shadows stretching unnaturally across the ice. When he blinked, they disappeared. When he blinked again, they reappeared, closer. He told Bran he heard breathing beneath the snow, slow and steady like a sleeping giant. For Urich, the ghost sniper wasn't a person or even a spirit. It was the land itself, something ancient and hungry, using the storm as a body. Signalman Oren had the most unsettling perspective of all. He trusted the radio more than his own senses, believing no matter what happened visually, sound would remain truthful. But the further they traveled, the more the radio betrayed him. He heard voices on frequencies that should have been dead. He heard their own transmissions repeating back to them with slight distortions, as if someone or something was listening and mimicking. At one point, while the squad huddled behind an ice outcrop, Oren picked up a whisper, "Don't move." It came through clearly, perfectly articulated, in a voice none of them recognized. Yet the radio showed no incoming signal. Oren's hands shook uncontrollably after that. These conflicting perspectives began to tear the squad apart. Markov pushed forward relentlessly, while Bren insisted they slow down. Lutz refused to speak. Urich refused to walk last in line. Oren begged them to turn off their radios altogether, claiming the ghost was using sound as a weapon. Tension spiked when they discovered a frost-covered Soviet marksman sitting upright against a broken sled. His eyes were frozen open, face twisted in horror, rifle still gripped in his hands. But the barrel had been bent cleanly downward, as if crushed by invisible force. A single spent casing lay beside him, warm to the touch. Markov insisted Soviet technology had caused it. Brain argued no human could fire a warm shot in a -40 hellstorm. Lutz stared at the bent rifle for a long time, then quietly muttered, "Metal doesn't bend like that. Not from temperature." Something squeezed it. After that moment, the squad moved in total silence. Their perspectives no longer private thoughts, but shared dread. The Arctic was no longer a battlefield, it was a presence, a thinking, watching entity. And each man now believed something different about the ghost sniper, each belief peeling back a different layer of terror. But none of them were prepared for the truth waiting at Cray 7. By the time the squad reached the outer edge of Outpost Cray 7, the storm had fallen into an unnatural quiet. Snowflakes hung in the air longer than they should, drifting slowly as if suspended by invisible threads. The silence was so absolute it pressed against their eardrums. Even Urich, who had been muttering prayers under his breath for hours, finally stopped speaking. The world around them felt paused, not dead, paused, as if something enormous was holding its breath beneath the ice. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came in the form of footprints, not leading into the outpost, but walking out of it. A long trail of deep, heavy boot prints cut across the snow, spaced perfectly, each step identical in depth. The spacing suggested a tall man, but the strangest part was the frost inside the prints. It was melted. Warm, Bren crouched, running a gloved finger across the rim. His breath hitched. "These were made minutes ago," he said. Markov scanned the empty horizon. Then whoever it is should be near. But there was no one. No sound. No movement, nothing. As they moved deeper into the outpost perimeter, they found a series of bizarre scenes. A watchtower had collapsed inward, not from artillery or wind, but as if pulled down by force from above. A barracks door hung open, coated in a crystalline frost pattern resembling branching veins. The handle was warm. Inside, bunks were overturned, blankets thrown aside, and a kettle sat on a stove still faintly steaming. Whatever had happened here had happened fast. Oren, clutching his radio like a lifeline, stepped forward. His static-filled device crackled faintly. A whisper bled through the noise, a voice soft enough to be mistaken for wind. Cold, inside. Oren froze, eyes wide. "That wasn't interference," he whispered. "Someone's still here." But when he adjusted the tuner, the whisper dissolved into a long, low-frequency hum that resonated through the air, vibrating the metal frames of the bunks. Then they reached the command room, and time seemed to warp.
He sprinted across
the door was torn from its hinges, thrown across the snow like a child's toy. Papers lay scattered across the floor, frozen mid-flutter as if the wind had been cut short in the act of blowing them. A lantern flickered on the wall, its flame bending sideways toward the center of the room. Not upward, sideways. At the center of the room lay Captain Reznov, commander of Cray-7. His body was kneeling, head lifted slightly, mouth open in a silent scream. His eyes were glazed with a frost so thick that it looked like white marble. But what chilled them most was his shadow. The lantern cast a long, sharp silhouette behind him, but the shadow pointed in the wrong direction. It leaned toward the door, not away from the light. Lutz whispered, "That's impossible." His voice cracked. Markov forced himself forward, touching the captain's rifle. The barrel was bent, just like the Soviet sniper they'd found earlier. The same crushing force, the same impossibility. Then came the sound. A single gunshot rang out across the frozen camp. Not loud, distant, muffled by snow, but precise. Familiar, the squad ducked instinctively. Direction? Markov barked. Brand shook his head. It came from everywhere. The Arctic reflected sound in unnatural ways, but this shot felt different, as if the ice itself had fired it. Moments later, something moved in the corner of the room. Yurik yelped, stumbling backwards and pointing his rifle. But what he had seen wasn't a figure. It was a curtain of frost lifting from the ground, rising like smoke. The frost twisted into faint shapes, hand-like tendrils reaching upward, before dissipating in the air. Then Oren's radio came alive, a burst of static, a whisper, a voice they all recognized. "Help me," it was Reznov's voice. Captain Reznov, the man kneeling dead in front of them. The whisper repeated, louder this time, mixed with static and something else, something mechanical like metal grinding beneath ice. "Help me, behind the storm." "He's behind the storm." The squad stared at Reznov's frozen corpse. His lips were sealed shut. He hadn't spoken in days, maybe longer. Yet his voice echoed through the radio as if he were calling out from somewhere far beneath the snow. Markov snapped. "We move now." They rushed outside, rifles raised, scanning the white expanse. The storm had begun to shift again. Snow rose in thin spirals, twisting like ghostly columns around the outpost. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision. The hair on the back of Bren's neck stood straight. "He's here," he whispered. Another gunshot cracked through the silence. Closer this time. The powder snow beside Markov exploded upward as a bullet tore through the ground. No muzzle flash, no visible shooter, just a perfect clean shot, a warning. Then they saw him. A silhouette standing far down the ridge, tall, still, cloaked in frost and shadow. The wind didn't touch him, the snow bent around him. And when he raised his rifle, the sky above the outpost seemed to crack like glass. This was the moment everything shifted. The point when they realized the sniper they had been hunting wasn't hunting them, it was hurting them.
The thermometer reading is wrong.
For something waiting beyond the storm.
hypothermia.
The world broke,
Check
all
the
at
core
once.
temp. Check
The
the
moment the
pressure.
silhouette on the ridge raised its rifle, the storm snapped awake like a living thing. Snow erupted upward, spiraling into violent white funnels that twisted around the outpost like massive serpents. The sky flashed with a pale, unnatural light. Not lightning, but a glowing fracture that spread across the clouds like a crack in glass. Captain Markov tried to bark orders, but the wind devoured his voice. Brain grabbed Yurik by the collar, dragging him behind a supply crate as a bullet whistled past, punching a perfectly round hole through the metal. No muzzle flash, no sound before impact, just clean death cutting through the air. Lutz pressed his back against the wall, swallowing his breath.
Stay close,
It's bending
Corporal.
the wind,
Don't let go.
he whispered, trembling. The sound, the shots, they aren't coming from a place. They're coming from everywhere. Markov peeked around the corner, only to recoil. The ghost sniper was no longer alone on the ridge. There were 3 silhouettes now, then 4, then 5. All standing in a staggered line, motionless, rifles lowered. But one by one, each figure flickered, glitching like broken film, until only one remained. It's the storm, Bran realized. It's copying him. A bullet struck the crate again, this time passing through the side and exiting vertically through the top, carving a perfect tunnel through solid metal. Yurik screamed, "That's impossible! Bullets don't move like that." They did tonight. Snow surged around them, rising in sharp spirals that moved against gravity. The ground seemed to pulse, trembling beneath their boots. Lutz clutched his head, shouting, "It's under us! Something under the ice!" Markov grabbed him, forcing eye contact. "Move. We flank him on the right. Bran, bring Yurik. Oren, stay behind!" A sudden force knocked Markov sideways as if the wind had solid mass. He slammed into the snow, breath ripped from his lungs. Oren shouted after him, but stopped mid-sentence. His radio crackled violently, lights flickering as if something inside was trying to break out. A voice tore through the static. "Behind the storm! He's behind the storm!" Then the radio burst, sending sparks into the air. Yurik ran to help Markov, but his boots froze in place. Literally. Ice formed around his feet in seconds, crawling up his shins like living frost. He screamed, clawing at the ice with his gloves. Bran rushed to him, striking the ice with the butt of his rifle, but the rifle shattered, metal breaking apart like glass. Yurik's shouting turned into sobs. "He's here! He's here!" A slow shadow drifted across the snow behind him. The ghost sniper had descended the ridge without making a sound. He now stood only 20 meters away, not walking, not stepping, just appearing closer each time the storm pulsed. Markov scrambled to his feet, raising his rifle with shaking hands. "Take the shot," he yelled. Bran fired first, 3 rounds in rapid succession. The bullets curved mid-air, bending away as if the air itself refused to let them touch the ghost. The sniper tilted his head, examining them as though curious. He slowly lifted his rifle, but instead of firing, he lowered it again, then raised his free hand. The storm obeyed. A vortex of snow surged behind him, lifting into a towering column that stretched into the sky. The glowing crack in the clouds widened, pulsing with a cold blue light. Oren fell to his knees. "It's not weather, it's a signal." The ghost sniper stepped toward them. His boots didn't sink into the snow. They didn't touch it at all. He hovered inches above the ground. His face was half frozen, features warped by frost and shadow. His eyes were hollow, filled with a blue light that flickered like dying embers. That he lifted one finger and pointed at the sky. The fissure above widened. A sound unlike anything earthly echoed across the ridge. A deep vibration, more felt than heard, shaking the bones of every man present. Bran fired again, screaming as tears froze mid-fall. The bullets bent in an arc around the ghost and embedded themselves in the snow behind him. "Why won't he die?" Yurik shrieked, still trapped in the ice. Markov realized the truth at the same moment the ghost lowered his rifle and looked at him directly.
Move.
The ghost stepped closer, and the
We have to follow
storm
the
dimmed
tracks,
around him,
exactly.
creating a silent corridor
only
between
safe
him
path
and
he left
Markov.
us.
He nodded once, slowly, deliberately, as if recognizing him. Then he spoke. Not with his mouth. His voice echoed directly inside their heads, cold and fractured like cracking ice. "Help me." The storm erupted again, a violent backlash that knocked the squad backward. The ghost's body glitched, splitting into multiple afterimages, then drawing together again. The
can't get
ice
a
beneath
signal
their
out.
feet cracked open with a thunderous roar as something beneath the surface shifted. A massive slab of ice rose upward, breaking through the ground like a breaching whale. The fissure in the sky aligned with the crack in the ice below. A column of blue light shot downward, engulfing the ghost sniper. The wind howled, the ice groaned. Yurik's final scream tore through the darkness, and then, in one single blinding flash, the ghost was yanked upward into the sky. Markov, closest to him, was pulled as well, dragged helplessly toward the crack of light. Bran reached out and grabbed his commander's hand, but the force was too strong. Markov slipped from his grasp, disappearing into the blizzard as the sky swallowed him whole. The storm collapsed in an instant. The light vanished, and the night returned. Only Bran, Yurik, Lutz, and Oren remained, scattered across the ridge, half buried in snow, staring at the empty sky where their captain had vanished with the ghost sniper. The Arctic went silent again, too silent, as if waiting. The storm vanished as abruptly as it had begun. One moment, the sky was a vortex of screaming frost and blinding light. The next, it was an empty black dome stretching endlessly above the ridge. Snow that had been spiraling upward froze midair, then drifted down in slow, uneven flakes like dying embers. The ground no longer vibrated. The wind no longer howled. The world simply stopped. Brain lay on his back, chest heaving, watching the last sliver of blue light fade into the clouds. He had seen men die in 1,000 different ways, but he had never seen anything like this. Something taken not by death, but by the sky itself. "Markov," he whispered, voice breaking. His breath formed a shaky trail of fog in the air, but there was no answer. Lutz pushed himself up, shaking uncontrollably. His glasses were cracked. One lens had shattered completely. Blood trickled from his nose. "He's gone," he muttered. "The captain, he's gone." Yurik sobbed quietly, curled into himself, ice still gripping his boots like shackles. Oren crawled through the snow toward the radio, which had been flung several meters away. Its casing was cracked open, wires exposed, antenna bent beyond repair. But as he touched it, a faint hum pulsed through his gloves. "It's still on," he whispered. "Something is still broadcasting." Bren forced himself to stand, ignoring the stabbing pain in his ribs. "We regroup," he said, though his voice trembled. "We move. We leave this place now." His words were hollow. No one responded. Even the wind refused to acknowledge him. The Arctic had returned to that suffocating silence. Too perfect, too absolute, like a breath held by something enormous just beneath the ice. They tried to free Yurik from the frost, but the ice refused to break. Every time Bren struck it with his rifle butt, the frost reformed instantly, sealing itself back into place. It was as if the land didn't want to let Yurik go. "Please," Yurik begged weakly, eyes darting at the sky. "Don't let it take me. Don't let it take me to..." His voice cracked into a whimper. Then the radio in Oren's hands crackled. A whisper emerged, faint, fractured, layered with static and something deeper, like distant grinding metal beneath a frozen lake. "Help me." Bren froze. So did Lutz. Yurik's sobbing stopped instantly, replaced by a horrified, breathless silence. The whisper repeated, clearer this time, echoing through the stillness like a voice traveling through a cave of ice. "Help me, Brain." It was Markov's voice, but it didn't sound like Markov anymore. It was stretched, distorted, pulled apart by something impossible. Oren dropped the radio in terror. It landed in the snow, but continued whispering even without power. The voice shifted, warping between frequencies.
The rock
He
outcrop
seized
offers no
through
warmth.
the storm shuttered.
Only a
Static
brief
swallowed the
mental
rest,
shield.
but one final
Lutz is
phrase cut
frozen
through
in a
clean
fetal
and sharp,
position.
cold enough to freeze bone. "He's not done." A deep rumble answered the transmission. Beneath their feet, the ice groaned. Loud, long,
Lutz, Oren,
mournful. A massive
get on
crack
your feet.
splintered
We
outward
move
across
now.
the ridge, stretching like a black vein in the snow. Yurik screamed, reaching out as the frost around his boots tightened, dragging him an inch deeper. Brain lunged to grab him, but a blast of cold air erupted from the crack, knocking him backward. Thus, the ground pulsed once, twice, then went still again. Silence returned. But now the silence felt different, not passive, watching. Brain sat in the snow, shaking violently. Tears froze on his cheeks. "We're leaving him," Lutz whispered. "We're leaving all of them." His voice carried a note of guilt and surrender, but no one corrected him. No one tried to deny it. Survival overruled loyalty. Terror overruled reason. They made the decision. Bren, Lutz, and Oren began the long walk back toward the southern corridor, leaving broken footprints in the fresh snow. They didn't speak, they didn't look back. The wind finally returned, soft at first, then building into a low, mournful cry that followed them across the empty plains. Hours passed before they allowed themselves to stop, and when they finally turned back for a final glance at the ridge, they froze. Yurik was gone. The ice where he had been held was shattered. But the strangest part, the most horrifying detail, was the single perfectly formed boot print beside the broken frost. Not pointing outward, not towards safety, pointing toward the storm, toward the direction where the ghost sniper had vanished with Markov. As the sky dimmed into the eternal Arctic night, something moved on the ridge. At first it looked like blowing snow,
stabilize him now.
drifting upward
Check
in
his
soft
vitals.
spirals. Then it grew
Formulas,
taller,
bending light.
thicker,
It's impossible.
solidifying into the faint outline of a
Pulse is
human
weak.
figure.
We're
It
losing
stood
him.
perfectly still, facing the
Official
squad's
military
retreating path.
report.
The silhouette
47
hovered an
incident.
inch above the ground,
Status.
snow curling around its
Lost to
form
the
like
storm.
smoke rising from a dead fire. Oren, whispered voice trembling uncontrollably. That's him." Bren didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat closed, breath stolen by dread. The figure lifted one hand, slow, deliberate, pointing directly at them from a distance too far for any human to see with such clarity.
The three
The wind
survivors
stopped.
walk away,
The night deepened.
leaving
And
the
from somewhere
frozen
deep
void
beneath the
behind
ice,
them.
a long, low whisper echoed across the tundra. Run. Bren didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the endless white, boots pounding desperately into the snow as the silhouette remained on the ridge, watching, waiting, patient as the storm. The Arctic had claimed its secrets, and it wasn't done collecting